Thank you all for joining us on what I know is a very busy Tuesday evening. So as you all know, we are gathered here this evening to pay tribute to the late President Charles Vest and to show our collective appreciation for his leadership in advancing gender equity here at MIT. Personally, I feel, and I know that many of you share my sentiment, that my career here at MIT was profoundly changed by President Vest's actions on behalf of women faculty and his dedicated efforts to promote gender equity more broadly. We are here today where we are in no small part due to Chuck Vest. And so this event was conceived as a tribute to Chuck Vest, as a way for us to say thank you for everything that he did to help women faculty and the cause of gender equity. And I have to say that the overwhelming response I received from all of you and from those who can only join us here tonight in spirit because of other commitments really shows the powerful impact that he had on our community. So tonight's event is co-sponsored by the MIT Program in Women's and Gender Studies, the Institute Community and Equity Office, the Office for Faculty Support, and the School of Humanities, Arts, and Social Sciences Dean's Office. So thank you to all of our co-sponsors. And I want to thank everyone for coming together tonight to join us, and also to draw special attention to our contingent of women scientists from Lincoln Lab, who have come all the way to join us for tonight's event. I do want to mention that the talks tonight will be filmed, so if people need to walk around to take refreshments or go to the bar, we ask that you please go around the back and not in front of the camera. But you should, of course, feel free to take refreshment as you like. So I will now turn things over to Diana Henderson, Professor of Literature and Dean for Curriculum and Faculty Support.
Thank you, Emma. Emma's done the lion's share, along with Haiti Gonzalez, of organizing tonight, and we want to thank them especially. This is, by the way, Women's Studies Week. I only found this out through my email today. So it's a beautiful convergence. The reason we're doing it tonight didn't have that awareness when we started. It was because it was the night we could all get some crucial people in the room together. And that we have managed to do that is really quite remarkable. When I came here, like Emma, I believe both in the year 1995, I came from a small college where I'd done a good deal of work with women's studies, and I'd been on a gender equity committee of our own. And we had the experience of what most people across America had for about 30 years, which is you did a lot of good work. You traced stories, quote-unquote anecdotes, did some Likert scales, and at the end of it, maybe some good came. And in fact, in ours, something very good came, that we made all our fraternities co-ed in response to a particularly ugly event. However, there was a lot more to that report, including a lot about the experience of our faculty women. And we were told, as so many people have been told, well, that's a perception. That's a perception, we understand, but I don't know that that's true or that applies across the board. And so that part of the report went away. And then coming here, this amazing moment when Chuck Vest gave those famous lines, and I'm sure Nancy will call our attention back to some of that context, it did change our worlds. I was lucky enough to meet some of you when I was on the SHAS school Gender Equity Committee, all 5 schools following the footsteps of our women scientists once this was seen as a real problem to solve. And that great MIT spirit of solving problems kicked in. And some of my best friends come from those experiences together. And some of my awareness of life at MIT and all its complexity comes from those days. I have to say, we're here to celebrate a gift, and his gift was a gift that keeps on giving in this community here today, but it's a gift that also needs to be perpetually renewed and remembered, and we're also here to share that with some others who may not have been so directly part of that round of work, because there's a lot of work still to do. So with no further ado, let me turn this over to 4 of the heroes of the process who ended up writing the sort of overview of the whole 5-school set of committee reports, starting with, that troublemaking woman from science, Nancy Hopkins.
Oh dear, you weren't referring to me, I hope. Yeah, gosh, this is really an amazing thing to have done, and I can't tell you how much this means. And to see these people here, so many of the people who were involved in the original study of the status of women faculty in the School of Science are right here. A few little sad exceptions, but we could almost hold a committee meeting. Jerry, Penny, Powell, there we all were. Molly. Oh, those were amazing, amazing days. And I was thinking, it sort of reminds me, I was saying to Jerry, of science. You go along, suddenly you see a result, and wow, that looks like it's more interesting than usual. But you don't really know what it means at the time. You just know it seems good. And those meetings were something quite amazing. Anyway, I was going to tell the sort of story of all that, but then I thought, well, it wouldn't be there if everybody didn't already know that. So I guess I just will start by saying, I have always believed that contemporary gender discrimination within universities is part reality and part perception. True, but I now understand reality is by far the greater part of the balance. And the moment that Lottie sent me this by email and appeared on the screen of my computer, the world changed. I think that it is so odd that I thought it was just my world that changed. I really had no clue of the magnitude of this thing that he had done. In fact, looking back, I find it's, even now, very hard for me to remember how different things were before he did do that, before Chuck Vest publicly endorsed the MIT report on the status of women in science, and how very difficult it was for many of us. What's amazing is it was just 15 years ago. That's not that long, but it almost seems like another era in time. For example, just to give you an idea of what it was like, in the 90s, in the mid-90s, less than 20 years ago, women were afraid to take family leave and have a baby because it could negatively impact their careers. To do them a favor, the Dean of Science kept the fact of their having a baby a secret from those who were going to vote on their tenure case in case it biased their view of that woman's accomplishments. Not that long ago. Back then, for a woman scientist to mention gender discrimination publicly was a serious threat to her career. You didn't do it. For an institution to do it opened that institution to bad press and lawsuits. And so no institution would do it. Well, if you can't discuss a problem, it makes it very hard to solve it. If you can't say what the problem is and talk about it, how are you going to fix it? So Chuck's public endorsement of the MIT report made it possible to bring all these problems to light so that institutions could begin to devise the solutions and make the institutional changes. So what made it possible for this to happen at that time? We've discussed it many times, and it's been very interesting, and certainly many things happened that just by good fortune came together to make this event possible, I think. But the most important to me, I believe, were Chuck himself, of course, we'll come back to that, and these particular women scientists. These women were superb, highly successful scientists. For example, of the 16 women who signed a letter to MIT stating that there was unconscious discrimination against women faculty, 4 of the 16 have won the United States National Medal of Science, conferred by the President of the United States. And more than 2/3 of them are members of the national academies. So this extraordinary group and the fact that they could come together and work together to identify patterns of discrimination in the treatment, their treatment, despite this tremendous success, was the essential component, I think. And I know last week at Chuck's Memorial I said, well, it could have been done 10 years earlier. I think maybe it could have been done, but in the sciences, I'm not sure there were 15 women who could have gotten together. And, you know, people say, oh, the number was too small. How could you know it meant anything? I'm telling you, it took that long to get 15. There were 15 plus one from engineering was allowed in. She's done okay. But of course, it wasn't just, so the women had to be able to work together. They had to do this, and many of them, you know, they weren't having problems so acute. They did this for future generations of women. There was no question about it. And then, of course, there had to be somebody in a position of power to hear them. So why was it this particular man? I noticed, and if you were at the MIT memorial service, or the equally magnificent, I thought, memorial service at the National Academy of Engineering, which I watched online, you saw people sort of struggling to find the right words to explain what was it about Chuck that made him able to accomplish so much, including this. And people referred to his upbringing, his personal experience of life in the South, his knowledge of academia, his long-standing commitment to diversity and fairness, academics' beliefs in data, his perceptiveness, his unbendable integrity, his courage, even his modest nature, which made it possible for him to listen to so well and to learn from other people, even from women. He could even learn from women. He listened to everybody. But when all was said and done, after listening to all of those tributes that were given, and when thought about this one great contribution for the advancement of women that was viewed, when I thought about it in the context of all that he accomplished, it seemed to me quite simply that he was a great man. This was truly a great man. And I was very struck by Senator Rockefeller, who called him a great American, and I thought, yep, that's the best, that just sums it right up. This was a great man. And I think it's a very rare thing. I think one doesn't even quite know how to recognize it because you don't see it very often. Maybe we won't see it again. I hope we do. And maybe you can't easily judge it even at the time. This was a truly great man. So the first big impact was having the courage to, as Lottie has always said, put gender on the table. But then, of course, Chuck was stuck with fixing the problem that he had acknowledged. So if you go back and actually read the 1999 MIT report on women in science, you'll see that every single concrete recommendation the women made to the administration has been carried out. When we wrote those things, we thought, we might as well go for it. This is so radical. Oh, they're going to love this one. You just couldn't imagine these things were going to happen. But they did happen at MIT. Believe me, not everywhere, but they happened at MIT. Everything that could be fixed by administrative action was fixed. So, are we done? Well, as you said, no, we're not. Why? Well, last time I looked, less than 20% of the STEM faculty at MIT were women. And I've noticed that the faculty numbers in fields like philosophy and economics aren't that different from the numbers in science. People always think this is a science problem. It isn't, which is why I think this particular tribute is so meaningful. The last time I looked, women biologists were less than 10% of the scientific advisory board members of the biotechnology companies founded by their own male colleagues. Even though they comprise 70% of the undergraduate majors, 50% of the PhDs, about 25 to 30% of the faculty, they are somehow excluded from an activity which has become central to many areas of the field. Finally, over the past couple of weeks, I reread the email exchanges I'd had with Chuck over the past year and a half. It was clear that he knew that this was not fixed yet. We're not done. What should we do to honor Chuck's memory? What would Chuck do? I think that the women faculty at MIT have to carry on. I think they should be an innovative think tank for women in academia, as they have been. I think they should continue to discuss these issues and come up with solutions and work with the administration to test them until they get to a point where they can truly say, now we're done. It's done. Now, the good news is it's no longer completely taboo to talk about these things. Much better situation. More than that, I think when we started, women were knocking on the door, sometimes banging on the door, but generally gently knocking on the door, asking to please be truly admitted to what's a man's world. But thanks to Chuck, we have been admitted, and we've been admitted to the highest levels of the university. We really have. Women have been presidents of this university, and deans and department heads. This is a different world. We are where we need to be to reshape that world and to lead with this institution on these issues. We are the institution now, not outsiders as we were when we started. So that's what I hope will be the future of this issue at MIT as a fitting tribute to Chuck Vest. And I think that's certainly what he would do and he would expect us to do. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Lottie Balin. As she's coming up, I just wanted to share, Nancy has pointed out how amazing these scholars were in science. They were many, many things, as well as great scholars. Lottie is, to my mind, always going to be the mentor of a great friend of mine, Susan Eaton, who had her life changed by working with Lottie. And I know in this room there are so many mentors. I look around at some of my own, and I think that's also a huge part of this community and its effectiveness. So, Lottie.
So I really just want to share a few recollections of Chuck on a number of counts. I hardly knew anything about him or knew him when he first came, and I sort of first paid attention at the overlap suit when he took on all the Ivy colleges, had agreed with the Justice Department decree or whatever it was, that they were no longer allowed to share financial data, and they all agreed to this, and Chuck said, MIT was included in the suit, and Chuck said, no. We share financial data so that students can decide where they want to go, if they're accepted by more than one, according to the institution, not according to how much financial aid they get. And he fought the Justice Department, and he won. And he made an arrangement with the Justice Department, not only for MIT, but for all the Ivy Leagues. And that, I thought, was just fabulous. He was a relatively new president at the time, and I was struck how little that was mentioned at the MIT service. It was mentioned more at the Academy of Energy. I think there was one point. But I really only got to know him when I became chair of the faculty, and for a year as chair to be. And this was before the report, though I think you people were collecting data, but I was outside of that. I'm not a scientist. But Chuck really was concerned about women. And I have a few stories. I'm not sure. I'm maybe telling stories I shouldn't be telling. But when Chuck decided that Catherine would be vice president and secretary of the corporation, as chair of the faculty, you have no power, no authority, but you get to talk to the president. And he made a special effort. He was making another appointment at the same time. He made a special effort to announce Catherine's appointment not at the same time, to hold that off in order to make it a vivid appointment. You must have been the first.
I wasn't the first.
You weren't the first.
I was the third.
Wow.
But we were all very close.
Right. So those were really events that happened before the report certainly was made public and before it was. But then once the report was public, and we got $1 million, half from the Ford Foundation and half from American Philanthropies, to do things with other universities, Chuck decided, as I'm sure you know, to invite these 8 other universities to join him in dealing with this effort. Now you need to know that both Harvard and Yale, when the report went public, both came up and their representatives said, well, it's too bad about MIT. It's good they're doing something about this, but it doesn't happen here. Nonetheless, he invited, among the 8, he invited the presidents of Harvard and Yale and 6 others. And I remember vividly that first meeting. There was a meeting of those presidents, and there were scientists from each of the schools and other administrators. And we, in preparation, it was held at MIT, we, in preparation for it, had written a statement that the presidents were going to sign. The statement said, first of all, it said, we all have this problem. And then it said, we're going to try to do something about it. We're going to get data. And we even put something in about, and we don't want anyone to get into trouble or be disadvantaged by family reasons. So we had it all worked out. So it was Chuck's job to get the presidents to sign. So he took them off into a room. We were all left outside. I have no idea what went on in that room, but it took a long, long time. But in the end, he got them to sign it, even the presidents of Harvard and Yale, and it really shows tremendous leadership, both before and after, and I miss him a lot.
We're now Women's and Gender Studies. We used to be Women's Studies. It used to be a Women in Science report. We now talk about intersectionality and change in a much more sophisticated and meaningful way, and a much more inclusive way. And one of the people I look to as a leader here and up the street in that regard is our next speaker, Evelyn Hammonds.
Thank you. It's so great to be here. It really is an honor for me to share my reflections about Chuck Vest today. First, since I left MIT and moved on that other stop on the red line, I've worked with many leaders in higher education, and when I reflect on the time that I worked with Chuck, I have come to realize how extraordinary he was. He was one of the wisest, kindest, most brilliant university presidents I have ever seen. He had such an unwavering core of integrity that affected everybody around him, especially those who worked closely with him. And I learned so much from him about what it means to be a visionary leader. So at the memorial service last week, I thought I wasn't going to cry. But I found that I couldn't keep the tears from falling. And as people talked about what Chuck meant to them personally, what he meant to the Institute, a flood of memories just came over me I just couldn't contain. So I'm glad to be here today to speak about him. Of course, we are here to celebrate his support for gender equity. Now, I just want to recount one story. Now, many of you might remember that in January 1994, MIT hosted a conference titled Black Women in the Academy, Defending Our Name, 1894 to 1994. The story about this conference appeared on the front page of the Chronicle of Higher Education. and it was entitled, "A Gathering of Black Women from Academe, More than 2,000 Gathered for What One Says Could Be the Event of the Century." The reporter went on to note that MIT had never seen so many black scholars on its campus, and that was the wry comment that was going around the 3-day meeting. Two prominent scholars noted that MIT was not alone because no institution of higher education had seen this kind of conference before. And during his opening remarks, President Vest stated, quote, "Events like this are affairs of the mind and affairs of the heart." And the distinguished literary scholar Nellie McKay said she was amused that the first conference like this was held at MIT, a place, she said, that was not seen as particularly inviting to any women, black or white. But President Vest, in his inimical style, acknowledged this amusement and surprise when he spoke at the start of the conference. He assured the participants that the site was appropriate. As it says in the article about him, about the conference, it says, Mr. Vest said that MIT had been founded on the belief that scholars should, quote, "look at things in entirely new ways and lay aside the old assumptions and ask ourselves, what if? What if the experiences of black women were more visible in our history and in our present," he said. What if their contributions had been more properly valued? What if their voices had been more truly heard? And he added, "I can't help but think that this conference is a major step in making the invisible visible." I did not remember those exact words. I knew that the room had exploded in applause when he finished speaking that morning. And the conference really put MIT on the map as a place where black women were welcomed. Yet another instance of Chuck's inspired leadership, and one that I think deserves a great deal of attention and credit. And I, at the time a young untenured assistant professor, never felt so supported by this institution. Indeed, Chuck has supported us all the way through the planning of this conference, of dealing with the foundations and how we were going to pull the money together, and he supported us every step of the way. He just was a man who stood tall when he believed what he was doing was right. And certainly his support for the conference, his support for me personally, simply changed my life. And I really feel blessed to have known him. I think MIT and the world are better for having him among us. There's no other president who said the kinds of things he said at that moment to black women scholars, and who then made it a point of responding to many of the leaders, African-American women scholars, who wrote to him to thank him for doing this conference. He sent me a copy of that letter and his response to those women. I don't know anybody else who's done this. Is, again, an example of inspired leadership. I agree with Nancy that the best legacy that we can give to Chuck is to keep doing the work.
I don't think it's a coincidence how many of the women who were involved with this project ended up being administrators for a time. I also think it's not a coincidence that the self-deprecation of thinking that the chair of the faculty has no authority doesn't apply to my experience of the next person who was the chair of the faculty. I had the honor to serve with her in that complex and wonderful role. And I also want to call attention with Lorna to a fourth dimension of what makes these women and made Chuck actually also such a remarkable person: the scholarship, the mentorship, the administration, and then the heart that's always a teacher. First and foremost, I think of Lorna Gibson as a teacher.
Thank you, Diana. So I unfortunately left my reading glasses in my office, so I'm trying to read this without my glasses. But Chuck Vest, what a remarkable person and what a remarkable life. In the recent remembrances of Chuck, many spoke of him as consistently doing the right thing. On need-blind admissions, on advocating on behalf of research universities at the national level, and what we've gathered to discuss tonight is gender equity. Chuck did what no one else in such a position had done before. He admitted that there had been discrimination against the women faculty at MIT, and he acted to promote gender equity. As we all know, his words carried tremendous weight and had an impact on gender equity here at MIT and at other universities nationally and internationally. His actions included setting up the Diversity Council to advise the administration on policies, to implementing those policies at MIT, to bringing together the group of 9 universities, as others have mentioned, to learn from what others were doing and to promote gender equity among them, and also to advocate for implementing gender equity policies more broadly. In interacting with Chuck, in collaboration with many others from the School of Engineering and across MIT, it gave me a much deeper appreciation of the positive impact senior administrators can have on the people and the institutions they serve. It was this that really led to me becoming interested in serving as the chair of the faculty and as associate provost at MIT, the realization of what an impact you could have and how you could affect things for the better. Those who spoke at the memorials for Chuck remembered his ability to listen, his sense of humor, his humility, his wisdom, his impact on academia and on science and technology, and to me, the very essence of Chuck is him doing the right thing.
I mentioned at the beginning being on another equity committee, and the person who was chairing that at the time was dean of the faculty. She was also a chemistry professor, and I was coming from interests in women's and gender studies, and she was coming from chemistry. And those worlds seemed, at that time, sort of different planets. We liked each other sort of socially, but when I said something about issues of diversity and equity and being equal is not being the same, she sort of nodded, surprised, and said, well, we'll meet at 8 in the morning with decaf coffee, because that's better for you. And I'm going, oh dear, I'm in a different world. And about halfway through this set of meetings, though, as she heard more and more stories, she revealed something. And it was one of those breakthrough moments on a personal level, which this was on an institutional level. And it was when she said to me, well, you know, I never really thought about discrimination before, but it is true, I always carry my letter of resignation in my purse. And I said, what? She says, yes, no, I need something in case it gets unbearable. And I said, oh, honey, can we talk? Can we talk across these boundaries? Can we share some vocabulary? I have a lot to learn about science, but I think we can share something. And that's something else we want to be celebrating tonight. And so it also reminds me that sometimes when these issues come up and somebody says, yes, well, we're going to repair the pipeline and that'll do away with the problem. And people in women's and gender studies sort of roll their eyes a little and say, can we talk about the leaky pipeline and all the work that's been done over the years, that we really have to talk across these boundaries. We have to talk to Lincoln Lab. We have to talk across the schools. And so it's with great pleasure that I call our last speaker of this part of the evening to share with you his perspective now that MIT has created a more inclusive position. Ed Bertinger. To carry on.
Thank you, Diane, and thank you so much to the preceding speakers. I'm humbled, honored, and most of all thrilled to be back with friends and to have this special feeling of our gathering to celebrate the legacy of a great leader, but also to celebrate the power of women at MIT, the value of acknowledging that power and of advancing the agenda for gender equity. I've been very, very privileged to share in that with a large number of you. Part reality and part perception, I now understand that reality is by far the greater part of the balance. What next? If Chuck had stopped with those words, I don't think we would be here in the same setting. I don't think over the last decade we would have celebrated the same growth in equity measures of our faculty and our students. I don't think we would have the same feelings about our experiences of an inclusive, equitable campus environment. What did Chuck do? We've heard much of it, but there are a combination of factors which I think are worth recalling because, as the previous speakers have said, we must continue on this journey. The first was to increase the representation of underrepresented groups, women principally, underrepresented minorities on the campus. And just during his presidential term, those numbers grew by about 50%. A little less for the female fraction of undergraduates, only because it was already above 1/3. Now, of course, it is close to 50%, but still, there is room to grow there for equity. In 2004, at the end of Chuck's term of office, more than 2/3 of MIT's women faculty had been hired since the beginning of his term. And of course, as noted, he hired the first female department head in science, the first 2 minority department heads in engineering, the first 5 female vice presidents, the first African-American chancellor. And he set the stage for another important event in MIT's life and the success of women. He set the stage to be succeeded by MIT's first female president. Chuck and Bob Bergeneau showed that it is not enough for men to acknowledge gender inequity. Men must lead the change. If men are the leaders, they must be leading the change. Now, today, 20% of academic council is female. But I'll tell you, when I sit in the Bush Room weekly and look at that august body, I'm struck every time by how few women are in the room. We need to keep working on the recruitment of women and their advancement into positions of leadership. Chuck put into place structures for supporting diversity and inclusion on the campus. And many of those structures have been duplicated, replicated, and extended by other universities. It's absolutely wonderful that the MIT 9 that was discussed by Lottie and others now is a group who share best practices and ideas. And for me, for instance, as a novice, a newbie in that group, it's absolutely amazing to have the benefit from the experience and wisdom of the women in the leadership roles at other universities who are advising me on how MIT can again improve its practices. Chuck established the Council on Faculty Diversity, which then metamorphosed into the Associate Provost for Faculty Equity. Again, giving voice in the academic council and in the senior leadership of the university. And those positions now have been joined into the Institute Community and Equity Office, a role that I've been very privileged to fill. Our work, of course, is not done. The issues that were identified back in as early as 1995 and certainly in the 1999 report persist. Progress has been made, but there are still issues to be addressed. Issues of representation in the faculty and in the senior leadership, issues of work-life balance, marginalization of women faculty and students. We continue to hear reports from our students and even female faculty who are told by their peers, you're here because you're a woman, or faculty who are told, you're here because of X, and not because of your excellence. I remind people that at MIT we don't award honorary degrees. We don't amend our degrees with honors. We just have one status of degree, we have one status of faculty. All the faculty are here because they merit that appointment. The self-assessment that was put into place in that 1999 report and in the following reports of the schools has proven to be a good model not only for other universities but for MIT itself, who in 2011 issued update reports from the schools of science and engineering as part of our 150th anniversary celebration. And I believe that will be an ongoing need. And then finally, we have a need to strengthen community so that everybody can achieve their best. We do that through events like this, and we do it by acknowledging the need. And I'd like to do it by saying that a good climate for women is a good climate, and I am thrilled and honored to be part of this group and others that work to advance the climate and equity of faculty and students at MIT, honoring Chuck Vest's memory.
Thank you, Ed. There was one last part to the anecdote about my friend in chemistry. She's now been the president of 2 colleges. So I don't think that's a coincidence either. The kind of growth and change that we've seen over the years is remarkable. It's also true that in the last 5 years here at MIT, I've talked to 2 women in science and engineering who have, one of whom left because she could not find that work-life balance that we all believe one should be able to have, and one who simply didn't like the pace, the pressures. And so there's still work to be done. It's the half empty, half full. But as I look at the leadership, the people I've known who have become these great leaders, I see around the room deans and all sorts of remarkable achievers. I see people who, quote unquote, lead from the middle, and people who push us from below, if you think in terms of hierarchical structures, which we try to ignore when we're in women's and gender studies, but have to negotiate with constantly. I look at the people who are moving us forward, and I'm so thrilled to turn the mic back to Emma Chang, who is leading us in women's and gender studies forward in the best ways possible.
Thank you, Diana. Thank you so much. I actually have nothing more to add except to say that I've been deeply moved by all the speeches heard here tonight and more impressed than ever about what a truly great man Chuck Vest was. I think there's no other way to describe than a great man. But beyond that, I've been doubly impressed yet again by how amazing you all are and what you contributed to all of this in the process. And so I want to take this opportunity on behalf of myself, but I think I also represent all of us in women's and gender studies to say a very sincere, heartfelt thank you. So now we will have some open time to enjoy the refreshments or have something from the bar, and then we will regather again at 6:30. I want to let people know that there will be an open mic time if anybody would feel like saying something else about Chuck Vest or this history. And while we're having some free time, I also want to tell you that Renee at this back table has kindly volunteered to help people if they would like to sign our digital guest book, which will appear on the website. So if you have any special words about Chuck that you would like to share, Renee will be happy to help you enter them into the digital guest book. So please enjoy this evening's events. I'm going to turn things over now to Megan Fernandez, who is our instructor for gender and technology this semester. We're so thrilled to have her with us in WGS. So Meg, would you like to come up?
So yes, I'm Megan. I'm teaching the Gender and Technology course in the Women and Gender Studies program here at MIT this semester. And mostly here in the front is my class. We're committed to talking about issues related to reproductive technologies, commercial surrogacy, cosmetic surgery, queer and transgender sexuality, biopower, ecofeminism, etc. Students in this class are not only writing critical papers, but are also responsible for creative projects at the end of the semester, which enact debates central to the course's concerns, which so far have included proposed projects such as crocheting a small-scale bridge, or conducting interviews with young high school women interested in technology at the Computer Science Exploration Day. So we have a series of guest lecturers for this class. One of them is an Indian lawyer from the Harvard Berkman Center of Internet and Society who works on the largest biometrics project in India. Another that just came was an Italian digital artist who works on, amongst other things, documentaries using internet montage during the Arab Spring. And this was just sort of give students a really broad idea of what we mean when we talk about gender and technology together.